Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. This is Rappler Talk. The Philippines stands to lose up to $6 billion a day by 2030 because of traffic. Traffic jams are getting worse. Experts say the demand for mass transit is also likely to hit 7.4 million passengers a day by 2030. What are we going to do about this? What can we learn from the policies of key megacities around the world? Well, joining us today is a man who knows a lot about this and has studied it globally. Urban planner Benji de la Peña, the Director of Community and National Strategy of the Knight Foundation. Benji, thanks so much for coming in.
Glad to be here.
So, I guess, assess Manila today. What does it look like? Why is traffic so bad?
Traffic is so bad because we are growing very, very rapidly, right? And part of that growth is that we're not growing in any more road space, right? It takes up about a third of the total land area of the city, which is par for all cities. The problem is that we haven't invested in mass transit. And we haven't tried to figure out better public transportation. In fact, when you started the introduction, you were saying traffic, traffic, traffic. That's been the problem. For 30 or 40 years, we keep thinking the problem is traffic.
Right.
It's not. That's a symptom, right? The problem is transportation. It's not a problem of how does a car get from point A to point B.
Right.
It's a problem of how does a person get from point A to point B.
Interesting.
Right? And we've been counting, and this is a sickness that many cities have. We've been counting the movement of cars instead of focusing on the movement of people.
Interesting.
So there was a big confab, I think, last week that I missed, USAD EDSA, where they were looking at solutions. And one of the numbers that came out of there, and we had known this for a while, was that 79% of the vehicles on the road are private vehicles.
Yes.
And yet 70% of the people moving on the roads are taking public transportation.
Wow.
So this is all a problem of geometry.
Yeah.
You have a car, it's about 10 square meters, and you're lucky if 4 people are riding it.
Right.
Whereas if you have a bus, it's 30 square meters and you can have 60 people riding it.
So why is the policy, why are we looking at it through the wrong lenses?
Well, I hate to sound left-leaning about it, but it's really about the elite, right? So the elite ride cars, the political elite ride cars, the media elite ride cars. If you're working for a corporation, what's the first thing you get when you become a manager? You get a car loan.
Right.
If you're a senior executive, you get the car benefit. Even if you're working for the unions, you get a car benefit of some sort. So the car is in a way in a status, and then it feeds this cycle, right? That because it's so hard to get around in public transportation, what you want to do is get a car.
Right, right.
And so when you get into a car, then you add to the traffic. In fact, Copenhagenize, which is a group based out of Copenhagen, has this poster that says, you are not stuck in traffic, you are the traffic.
Right.
Well, so go ride a bike. That's what they say.
So this seems, though, it's not rocket science to think that the first thing a megacity should be looking at is mass transport system.
The whole transportation system. When people say usually mass transport system, they think, oh, we need to fix the trains. No, we need to fix all of transportation. The buses, the jeeps, the tricycles, the informal transportation system.
So yesterday I actually attended the economic briefing, the Philippine economy, #EconomyPH is the hashtag that we used, right? And there they showed the dream plan. JICA is helping fund it. The government has already put it in its budget for the next, however many years. And there they're looking at decongesting Manila by moving people out.
Right.
And then building train systems. You've seen this plan. What do you think of it?
I've seen this plan. One, it's an infrastructure plan.
Okay.
Right. It says things like we want to improve the livability of Manila, but if you read through the plan, it doesn't really say anything about livability. It just says something about moving traffic and what kind of roads you need to build in the highways. So this is good because we need to look at the big thing and we need to plan, but it falls on two basic weak principles for me, right? The idea of decongesting Manila, which is often confused for depopulating Metro Manila. Right. The decongestion or congestion is a term traffic engineers use for the movement of cars on the road. It's also a medical term when you're congested.
Correct.
And very often we hear the words decongest Metro Manila about moving people out of Metro Manila.
Right.
Unfortunately, urban dynamics doesn't grow that way. The only
jobs are here.
Exactly.
Right.
And the bigger a city is, the more efficient it actually is in terms of providing jobs. The only time a city loses population is when the economy is failing. And believe me, you don't want to see a city, right? You've been to Detroit, or you've seen the kind of Rust Belt cities that we've seen in other places. or even in the old industrial cities of Europe that are
Right.
losing population, that's what decongestion looks like. You don't want that.
So, are you saying our urban planners failed in Manila?
That's a hard thing to say, right? So because it proceeds from this imagination that an urban plan will solve everything. Usually doesn't. Every city has a set of plans that it wasn't able to execute on. The mega city, the granddaddy of megacities, Tokyo,
Yep.
35 million people, actually doesn't have a plan. They have an environmental plan, they had transportation plans, they got burned down twice. So there was a massive fire before World War II, they were firebombed in World War II, or at the end of World War II, they couldn't execute on any plans. They kind of grew haphazardly.
Right.
But they focus on public transportation and developing the trains. And second, they let the city grow by itself, right, without trying to impose a plan.
Right.
And it still is one of the most livable cities in the world at 35 million. It's 3 times the size of Metro Manila.
So what are we doing
population.
wrong? I mean, if you go outside, you know, I am in a car,
Yeah.
but I drive by and I look at people just waiting online for
Right.
jeepneys or buses, and then when they
Right.
get on, they have to. It's horrible.
It is, and it proceeds from focusing on vehicles rather than people.
Okay.
Right. So look at what we've done with buses. What are the interventions? We've had big numbers painted on them, and then we've created flyovers so that they don't have to pass the main roads. None of those are about the service.
Right.
They're all about traffic management, and
Okay.
we have a long way to go. They are bad. They do behave badly. We haven't looked at what is the economic model, what is the business model that drives this behavior. I think we're coming to realize that. They realized that the boundary system was bad, we need
Right.
a wage system.
Right.
Seoul went and overhauled its bus system,
Yeah.
right? And said, no, we're gonna write franchises and we're gonna pay you to run buses so that you're not getting, your business isn't earning fares.
Right.
And then you walk out on the street and you realize we do not respect the pedestrian at all. We provide so little for the pedestrian. In
Right.
fact, all over, up and down EDSA, it's so symbolic, right? You see these big signs that say, "Bawal ang tao dito."
Right.
Right? So when you start building a city for vehicles, it becomes less and less livable for people who actually need to use the city.
So first paradigm it
It's
should be
people first.
shifted, right?
People
first.
first.
The same way we say user first. So people
Absolutely.
first. So if you had a magic wand, how would you solve this problem?
You'd start with people, right? You'd start at the human scale and say, what do our sidewalks look like? What
Our
does it
sidewalks
look
are
like?
atrocious.
They are atrocious, right? So
Right.
they're rebuilding Julia Vargas, and they've blocked off the sidewalk. In order to get here, I walked from Podium, right? There's a point where the sidewalk completely ends. You can't cross over because the overpass is under repair. You have to cross into the street and there's no way to get onto the other side, so you have to walk on the road. And if you were rolling this and saying the first thing you think about is people, then you think about where they're going to walk.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And so first put people first.
Yeah.
Second, that also goes into how you think about transportation.
Right.
How many people are we moving
In a day.
versus how many cars are we moving?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And so what gets measured matters, right? And gets changed.
Correct.
We don't have pedestrian counts,
Yes.
right? We have counts for vehicles,
Yes.
but we don't have pedestrian counts.
Well, is it true? I mean, again, Manila grows. Metro Manila is 12 million during the day, 8 million at night.
Yes.
These are the old numbers. So 12 million come into Manila during
Yeah.
the day, and then they go outside Metro Manila,
Right.
and it's 8 million at night.
Right.
So how would you fix? So if you use the paradigm of people first.
The other thing is housing.
Okay.
Right, that's not even in the equation. So
Right.
what we've set up is, one, we don't have a solid housing policy. The housing policy we have, 7279,
Yes.
is the Housing and Urban Development Law, the LINA law, right?
Right.
And it provides for affordable housing, which is good,
Right.
except it doesn't provide affordable housing in the right places. Right?
In
So you
areas
say,
where there are jobs.
yes, and in areas where people need to work. So
Right.
our affordable housing is out in the periphery.
Yeah.
So people travel in from Cavite and Bulacan and all of that into the city to go to jobs.
Right.
And what that does is you're generating trips, right? And why can't we provide affordable housing where it's needed, and more so rental affordable housing? Because one of the paradigms we need to get over, and even big countries like the US need to get over it, is that home ownership is the thing, right? So the choices for a middle income household here is, do I buy a house in Cavite and Imus and commute in an hour and a half or 2 hours one way?
Correct.
Or there's nothing to afford around the CBD except maybe to bed space in a slum area.
Yeah.
And that would only take me 10, 15 minutes. Right? So those are choices.
Right.
But we could be providing more affordable housing in all of these. We have a building boom going on.
Right.
But we haven't said, okay, for every tall building that comes up.
We haven't zoned it in a way.
We haven't zoned it. We haven't done inclusionary zoning.
Actually, technically there is, but
There
it's
is.
not being followed.
Yeah, well, the inclusionary zoning says, which is 7279 says,
Right.
Where it permits in the same area.
Right.
Right. But
where it permits.
Right, where possible, and that was inserted in by the developer. So I'm supposed to create 20% of the units based on affordable units based on the size of the development.
Right.
I will put it off into the periphery,
Okay.
rather than where people need to live.
So use people first, housing.
Housing and
third?
transportation are totally tied, right?
Okay.
And then the most successful cities that manage transportation actually make it more costly to own and operate a car. You have
Like Singapore, which
with ERP,
taxes almost
right?
100%.
You've got
right?
congestion pricing to go into the central business district during particular times.
Right.
You've got the permit system, you've got the parking system requirements. So it's very costly for you to own a car. The trade-off, of course, is you have to have efficient public transportation. London followed it, and what they're doing is the congestion pricing is paying for mass transit.
Yes.
Right. And so we could be doing that. But it needs some serious shaking up of our priorities and paradigms.
And what is the main thing that needs to change?
Well, if I had a magic wish, right,
Right.
I would force all of our public officials to take public transit.
Public transportation. That makes sense.
Right. Because then they'll feel it and they'll realize that's a problem.
But do you think there's a realization now that development is now being seriously curtailed by the ability to move around the city?
I think so. I think the big-time developers are realizing that they cannot just be concerned with their
Growth.
insular development,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah.
the competitiveness across the region is linked to the infrastructure of the city.
Do you see in policymakers an awareness that this, in terms of how to deal with this problem?
I think it's starting to be there, right? So you
Okay.
hear Senator Bamakino saying, well, we need to do something about buses.
Right.
Right, that we need to move people, and so a number of the more progressive senators are starting to say it.
Right.
I think we're there. I think we're getting there, but it needs a bit more of a push. It needs. One of the things I haven't seen is how are we reorganizing government to actually address this? We haven't. Right?
Yeah,
If it's a
not at
really
all.
important problem,
Yeah.
we haven't reorganized government to actually address transportation. We put together a traffic task force,
Right.
which again is focusing on the
On
symptom
traffic. Right.
rather
right.
than the disease.
You mentioned before we were beginning, you were talking about how Manila is in its growth
Yes,
spurt.
yes.
And interesting because the Western world was in its growth spurt in the age of industrialization,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
1800s, 1900s. And here we are coming to our growth spurt at the age of technology, when
Yes.
technology is there.
Yes.
What are the pros and cons of this? I mean, I guess the first step, because I'm so concerned about technology, how can we use technology to help?
Well, it's already helping, right? So you get on an Uber,
Yep,
and your
absolutely.
Uber driver is
Yeah.
using Waze
Yep.
to figure out where to drive.
Yep.
That's very helpful. Whereas
Yep.
before, it's like you only knew a few routes.
Right.
So that's helping in a way. The whole idea of shared use services, of ways where I don't have to own a car,
Right.
and I will just hail it and then it comes, that's really, really helping.
Right.
I think we need to bring more data into the game, and that's
Yeah,
one
the
of
data.
the other points I make about the government. We need to bring data into the fight, and we
Right.
don't. We're not collecting data. We're not really actively collecting data of where the vehicles are. Los Angeles has a deal with Waze,
Right.
right? That basically Waze data helps Los Angeles understand its
Why
traffic.
do we not do that? Waze, by the way, says Metro Manila is the traffic is the worst in the world in Metro Manila. Is that correct?
I don't know. Every time there's a list, and the media love lists. You're either there or you're not there.
Right.
We don't really have clear standards of where traffic is. Maybe Waze has the closest number because
Right.
they know the delays.
Right, because they also, they're counting all of us,
Yeah,
right?
the ones
Because
that
of our
use it.
data,
The
right?
ones who use
Exactly.
it.
The ones
But
who
but
use
we're
it.
not limited to Waze, right? That's
Right.
the app itself. The cell phone signals
Yes.
tell you.
So I was
about
going to say that
movement.
you can actually chart movement of people
Absolutely.
based on where
Absolutely.
they go, and we're
Absolutely.
114% penetration rate in terms
Absolutely.
of cell phones.
Absolutely.
And what have you seen this data? What does this
No,
show
I
about
haven't
the
seen it in
Philippines?
Metro Manila.
What would you think it would suggest about the Philippines?
I think we haven't thought about it or again, this reorganization, right, of government. There's no one in government that worries about transportation in Metro Manila. Who does? Is there anyone? No. Now,
No.
DOTC, but they're really national. DPWH, but it's the highways, the
Infrastructure.
infrastructure,
Really the
right? But
infrastructure.
in terms of movement across the city, who is? Is it MNDA? Is traffic management in
Right.
some ways? And so you need to have some locus of where this thinking could happen. It's a problem too in other countries in the world. So a lot of this data which has public purpose, could have public purpose, is held by private hands.
Right.
In the US, there's a company called AirSage that
Yep.
aggregates the data from the cell phone companies and sells it back. The data is fine enough that they can tell who's walking, who's on a bike, and who's actually in a car. Right? So maybe that might not be so fine here because everyone's stuck in traffic. But you would know, right? So and you could take that data and use it to understand how a city works. So, sorry to digress into an example.
No.
A project I helped fund in Nairobi is called the Digital Matatu. The Matatu is the AUV
Interesting.
of,
Yeah,
of Africa. It's called Okada in many other places and Totros. And Nairobi's transportation system is hooked on this AUV style vans, right? They didn't have a map of where these routes are. They were giving franchises. And this group small group from Columbia University, MIT, and University of Nairobi went and mapped the routes and mapped where stops were.
Right.
And they created the first digital map of the routes in
How
Nairobi.
nice. Yeah.
And the city so welcomed it, they made it the official map. The other, it's on Google Maps, right? The first informal transit system on Google Maps.
Fantastic.
And what they're going to try to do with it is to shift to a cashless payment system
That's fantastic.
for matatus
Right.
that is also connected to that map. We need to be thinking about things like
Mobile
that.
payment
Yes,
system
absolutely.
so that you're in and out, right?
And you could slice the value chain, the supply
Right.
chain of transportation, so that you reconfigure the incentives, right? So if you're paying bus companies to run the bus franchises, they're not trying to chase passengers.
Right.
If you're collecting the payment and the payment is done through cashless transactions, then you're getting more data about it, right?
Right.
And it's easier to push discounts for poorer customers, when you can target it better. So there's a lot of potential. The downside is that if you get autonomous vehicles, they could either be good or bad,
Correct.
right? But we can go into that later.
Thomas Stickney at Tom Twitch, and I think he lives outside of the Philippines.
Yeah.
Do you think Filipinos have an automobile dependency problem?
That sounds like, I'm a drug dependent, right? That we overvalue the role and the choices of the individual. In fact, whenever we talk about traffic, it almost always redounds to we just need to be
cars.
more disciplined. No, it's individual
it's not.
choice.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's actually
No, we are a product of the system.
Right, correct,
They
correct.
are automobile dependent because mass transit is really bad.
Correct.
Although it's the elite and the middle class who is dependent on automobiles, because
The-
8 out of 10 take public transit.
Correct.
Except up until the last few years, that was invisible.
Right.
That was
Right.
invisible. So they're not auto-dependent, except that when you have no other choices and you can afford it.
Chicken or the egg?
Right.
I think a lot of the middle class, or even people who have cars, would rather take mass
absolutely.
transit if
If
it
it was
works,
efficient.
right?
If it was
If you
efficient.
don't have to wait
Right.
2
Right.
hours, 3 hours. I mean, how would you untangle this chicken or the egg question? What are the first steps that need
We
to
need
happen?
to overhaul public transportation. Completely overhaul it. If we were going to start from zero and say, okay, what would this transportation look like as distributed as it can be? Because one of the good things about it is it's
Right.
distributed.
Right.
If you go to any Western city or American city, public transportation is so hard to get by. Right? Some places you wait for 2 hours to get the bus that comes once a time. Here we have very rich transportation networks, except it's chaotic. Right? But if you're going to rebuild that, keep the richness, what would you do? And I think slicing and other cities have been successful in slicing the value chain differently, so that then you provide the right service and you get the right pay. The other is to stop thinking of it as just a private business. You have to think of it as a utility of the city.
Correct.
And so
It's infrastructure. It's like oxygen.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. It's critical to the life of the city.
Yeah.
So it should be critical in the policy decisions. It should be critical in the investments. Not just the big highways, but the way public transportation runs, and not just the trains.
Right.
The buses and the jeepneys, the tricycles,
Right.
and everything else.
Which government is doing it right in Southeast Asia? And let's not include Singapore.
Let's not include Singapore,
Yeah,
right?
Singapore is an anomaly.
Outlier, right? It's
Yeah, but it is
outlier.
incredible how
It is,
efficient and how they have it down to you can actually say stop putting chewing. They ban chewing gum
Yes.
because it makes
Yes.
the door stick and
It's always
delays it.
very, very helpful when you have a single layer of government, right? Which is also the national government. But you know, you gotta give Singapore its chops. They're doing it correctly.
So which government in Southeast Asia is doing it well?
Man,
Is there
that's
anyone
hard
we
to
can
say.
look at?
You know, you can't hold up a city and say follow that city.
Right.
It's
different for every.
It's different for every city, but there are things we can adopt and say. So Mexico City, Bogota have rolled out really good bus rapid transit systems. So has Guangzhou, and it's the fastest to roll out, and it also helps discipline the road. Right, so we need to be copying that. Hong Kong and Tokyo have great models of value capture, where the properties around train stations pay for the services of the train station. So it keeps the train stations running on time, high quality service. Also, you create housing around the train station that people can afford, so you get more usage.
So you can walk.
Right.
You talked earlier about how it's a change in paradigm.
Yes.
The way our legislators, the way our government needs to think about it, the way people need to think about it, right? Why have we not looked at that? Is it just because we're just starting to grow now? We have actually our GDP.
We've been in a boom for a while. I don't know. I think it really is that our leadership rides cars.
Okay, that's interesting. A few questions, only ICE baby, and it's interesting to hear what you think. What exactly is the government doing other than educating private bus companies who are 70% the cause of traffic? First, is that correct, that bus companies cause 70% of the traffic?
I don't know where these numbers come from.
Right.
So who causes traffic is a very fine-grained thing, right? So they're all badly behaved. The buses particularly, and they're big, right? What we do know the numbers is that 79% of the vehicles on the road are privately owned.
Yep.
Right, and we haven't had actually real growth in the number of bus vehicles for a decade.
So everyone with a car is contributing to
the traffic, and so are the buses. I mean, we have to say that. But the question he had is, what are we doing? I don't know. That's a question that we should ask the government. I know they're talking to Seoul. They're talking to Yong-chul Kim, who was the leader of Korea's Transportation Institute that led the bus reform system in Korea. So hopefully that they find both the will and the knowledge to try to do it. The other that I would flip on it is that we don't have actually citizens groups that pressure the government.
Correct.
And set up a different vision.
Right.
Right. So we're always saying that the government has to have political will, but political will doesn't come out of fiat. It's manufactured by pressure from citizens.
Correct.
And very directed pressure. And I think we need more groups that are thinking about the city and can survive electoral cycles to keep putting the agenda on the...
If you're a Filipino and you want to learn more about this, get educated, because part of the problem is, how do you put pressure if you don't understand exactly why it is? How would you tell our viewers to learn more about it? Where can they go?
There's lots of places. The Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, itdp.org. World Resources Institute, Embark, has great resources about it. I mean, we live in the age of the internet where you can Google things and they will teach you, and there'll be videos, right? And I had said this in an interview that became an article for another publication, that we really need to organize. Right? We need to organize as commuters, and we need to organize think tanks. So what can you do? Get educated, but also listen. Don't fall for numbers that say they're the cause of 70% of the traffic. We don't know where that number is from. It could be right. I don't know. Right.
So there are more questions here, but we're running out of time.
Right.
So Benji's Twitter account is @BenjiDLP.
Yes.
So continue the conversation online. Your last thoughts in terms of where we are right now. I mean, the short, medium, long term.
I'm very hopeful.
Wow,
this,
good.
So
you must be.
If you look at the cities that were at their worst times of growth, right? London in the 1800s, you know how bad it was? The Thames was a stinking mess.
Right.
They had to put lime on the curtains and it would actually catch fire.
Right.
And they were at 3 million. And they said they couldn't grow anymore. They're at 8 million now and still growing. One of the most livable cities. New York, most horrible place in the world in the early 1900s.
That's when they had the
Lower
sweatshops.
They had cholera running through that place, right? And it was their area of rapid growth.
Right.
They were also about a decade after that, within a decade, built nearly all of the subway lines in New York, right? And so cities have a way of figuring themselves out, particularly megacities. And I think we need to take care of our megacity. This is the economic engine of the country. It's par for the course. Absolutely. Tokyo is the economic engine of Japan, and Paris is the economic engine of France, right? And so we need to pay, rather than getting distracted with trying to decongest Metro Manila, let's solve the right problems that we have now, because they are solvable.
That's fantastic. Thank you. My gosh.
Thank you so much.
So very, very good to speak with you. We've been talking to urban planner Benji de la Peña about infrastructure, transportation problems, people first. He says organize. We need to organize. Sorry, last thought on that one. How is there already a group that we should be joining?
Oh, there's a couple that have started online. There's the Metro Manila Transit Riders Union.
Okay.
Is one of them. There's the problem is translating. It's easy to organize something online.
How do you bring it to the real world? This is the same thing. Well, again, thank you so much, Benji.
Thank you so much,
Benji de la Peña at Benji DLP. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for watching.